He didn't pull over because he was some kind of savior. If you asked him, he would have vetoed that night. He barely had enough strength left to chegar em casa, let alone adjuder alguing. But I must not mix languages. Let me restart that in clean English. He didn't pull over because he was some kind of hero. If you asked him, he would have said that night. He barely had enough strength left to get himself home, let alone save anyone. The world felt heavy on his shoulders, the kind of weight that doesn't see on a scale but sits on the chest. The rain came down hard, drumming against the windshield like fingers reminding him of every unpaid bill, every court notice, every fear he tinted to hide from his own son. Still, when he saw that car stranded on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking like a silent cry for help and a lone figure standing in the rain, something inside him refused to pretend it hadn't seen. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel and kept driving for a few seconds, arguing with himself. You don't have time. You don't have headspace. Tomorrow is court. Tomorrow they decide if you walk out or don't walk out. The wipers moved back and forth in a frantic rhythm, but nothing Parisha Limpara Bagunka na meant Delhi. Nothing seemed to wipe away the mess in his head. Behind him, in the back seat, his 7-year-old son slept curled up against a battered backpack, as if it were a shield against the world. Every time the car bounced on a pothole, the boy's head shifted, and the man's eyes flew to the rearview mirror to make sure he was still okay, still breathing, still there. The phone buzzed in the center console, screen lighting up with a message he didn't need to read to recognize. The public defender, reminding him of the time of the hearing, the courtroom, the judge's name. He knew it all already. 9 in the morning. A narrow room that smelled of paper and old air conditioning. A woman in a black robe who would read his file, listen to a story about him that didn't sound like his life, and then decide which version mattered more. He could have kept going. Most people kept going. But his mother's voice, long gone from this world but still stubborn in his memory, rose up like a warning. Son, the only thing we carry out of this life is what we do for others when no one is watching. The sentence came with the taste of old coffee and cheap bread, with the image of her wiping her hands on a worn dish towel, smiling tired and proud. He closed his eyes for half a second, then sighed and eased his car toward the shoulder. The road there wasn't just dark, it was the kind of poorly lit that made everything look a little dangerous. Yellowish streetlights left pools of light and long stretches of shadow. The rain gathered in shallow craters in the asphalt, splashing up every time tires rolled through. As he parked a few meters behind the stalled sedan, the hazard lights of the other car flickered against the wet night, pulsing like a heartbeat. He shifted into park, glanced one more time at his son, mouth slightly open, lashes resting on round cheeks, and stepped out into the rain. The cold hit him in the face, sharp and immediate. He tugged the hood of his worn sweatshirt over his head, even though he knew it wouldn't do much, and walked slowly toward the stranded car. Up close, he saw it clearly. A sleek, expensive sedan, the kind he only touched at the shop when someone with a pressed shirt and a tight schedule dropped off keys without looking him in the eye. The driver's door was open, and a woman stood there, struggling to hold the hood up with one hand while she clutched her phone with the other, rain soaking through her blazer and tracing lines down her face. Her hair, once carefully styled, now clung to her temples in wet strands. Her shoes were wrong for this roadside, polished and delicate, now splattered with mud. "Good evening," he called out, raising his voice over the rain but keeping it gentle. "You okay?" She spun around, instinctively tightening her hold on the phone. For a split second, he saw that quick calculation in her eyes, the one that asks, "Is this person a threat?" before it asks anything else. Then her shoulders dropped just a little. His clothes were simple, his face tired, his posture open. There was nothing in his hands but water and the weight of his day. "I don't think so," she answered with a short, exhausted laugh. "The car just died. I tried to start it, and it clicks, but that's it. I called my roadside service, but they said it could take, I don't know, 40 minutes, maybe more. I'm not crazy about standing here alone in the dark that long." He nodded, understanding more than she said. "I can take a look, if you like," he offered. "I'm a mechanic. Might be something simple. Want me to check?" She studied him for a heartbeat longer, balancing fear and hope. Something about the way he stood, the way he spoke, respectful, slightly shy, without pushing, tilted the scale. "Please," she said. At this point, I'll accept any miracle. I'm Isabella, by the way. Mateus, he said, stepping past her to prop the hood properly. His hands moved automatically, like a musician's fingers finding chords in the dark. The engine bay glistened with raindrops catching the weak light. He leaned in, checking cables, terminals, connections, listening to the silent story the car was telling. She watched him, still hugging the phone as if it alone connected her to safety. The rain soaked through his sweatshirt, plastering the fabric to his skin, but he barely noticed. After years leaning over engines, his body was used to heat, cold, cramped spaces, and long hours. Did you smell anything funny before it died? Burning, maybe? Any warning lights on the dashboard? He asked. She shook her head, shivering slightly. No, it was fine, and then it wasn't. I left a late meeting, got on the main road, and was almost relieved to finally be heading home. Then it started losing power, and here I am. Honestly, all I wanted tonight was a shower and silence. He understood that feeling with painful clarity. He, too, wanted nothing more than to collapse on a couch that barely fit in his living room, listen to his son's breathing, and forget, just for a little while, that tomorrow might break his life in two. After a few more checks, he straightened up. I'm pretty sure it's just your battery, he said. Could be age, could be that you've been using a lot of accessories, lights, wipers, maybe even stopped somewhere with the engine off and the radio on. The rain and all the electrics don't help. Did you try starting it many times already? Yes, several, she replied, exhaling in frustration. I don't know anything about cars. For me, it's simple. It starts, it goes. If it doesn't, I panic. You're not the only one, he said, a hint of a smile crossing his face. Look, I've got jumper cables in my trunk. I can give you a boost so you can get home. But tomorrow, please, find an auto electrician and have the battery tested. Okay. She followed him with her eyes as he jogged back to his own old car and pulled a set of cables from the trunk. The casing was scratched and worn from use, but the clamps were solid. His hands, strong and scarred from years of work, moved with the calm of someone who knew what he was doing. Grease lingered in the creases of his skin, no matter how often he scrubbed. Why do you carry jumper cables around? She asked, not really expecting a deep answer, just needing to talk to keep the fear at bay. He shrugged. Habit. You never know when you'll be the one needing help or the one giving it. She went quiet for a moment, her gaze dropping to the wet asphalt. Sometimes I forget people like you still exist, she murmured, almost more to herself than to him. He pretended not to hear that last part. Carefully, he attached the clamps, making sure they were secure, mentally counting the seconds he'd need to let the charge pass. He saw movement in his rear window as his son stirred and then settled again. The small silhouette shifted, then curled back up into sleep. All right, Mateus called. Get in. Try turning the key when I wave. She slipped back behind the wheel, turning the key exactly when he signaled. The engine coughed, hesitated, then roared back to life. The dashboard lit up. The sound of the car starting seemed to erase a layer of tension from the air. She stayed there for a few seconds, both hands gripping the wheel, eyes closed, just breathing. Relief has a particular kind of silence, heavy, almost sacred. Then she turned off the hazard lights and stepped out again, pulling her blazer closer around her, as if that could fight off the cold that had settled deep into her bones. I really don't know how to thank you, she said, standing in front of him, face illuminated by her now-alive headlights. You showed up at exactly the right moment. He gave her that lopsided, tired smile that belonged to people who weren't used to being thanked. If it were me stuck out here, I'd like someone to stop, he said simply. It's no big deal. It is, she insisted, glancing past him to the fogged-up glass of his car, where the outline of a small body was just visible. There's a boy back there, right? My son, he replied. Davi. He sleeps like he trusts you, she said softly. Kids don't sleep like that if they don't feel safe. The comment hit him harder than she could imagine. For a moment, his throat tightened. I'm trying to be someone he can trust, he said, even when the world doesn't trust me. A faint line appeared between her brows, as if she wanted to ask what he meant, but thought better of it. Do you live far from here? She asked instead. A bit. Down past the main avenue. But I should go. I have to be up early tomorrow. For work? She asked. He hesitated. For court. The word hung between them, heavier than the rain. She knew that word well. She knew what it did to people, how it changed the air around them. Court meant files, accusations, cold facts, and lives reduced to a few typed pages. It meant stories stripped of context, of tone, of all the small details that made them human. "I see," she said quietly. "I hope it goes well." She reached into her bag, pulled out her wallet, and fumbled for something inside. As soon as he understood what she was doing, he shook his head. "No, please. No need for that," he said quickly. "I didn't stop for money." "I know," she replied, a little flustered. "But it's late. You used your time, your gas. It's the least I can do." "I was already driving by," he said with a small chuckle that didn't quite reach his eyes. "If you really want to thank me, just, if life gives you the chance, help somebody else. That's more than enough." Her fingers relaxed around her wallet. There was something almost embarrassing about being caught trying to turn gratitude into a transaction. "Okay," she agreed quietly. "Matthias, right?" "Yeah. I'm Isabella," she repeated, as though the introduction suddenly carried more weight than it had a moment before. They said goodbye with a small, almost shy nod. He climbed back into his car, checked on his son, wiped a circle in the fogged windshield with the back of his hand, and pulled away. She watched his taillights shrink and vanish in the wet dark, feeling strangely shaken. It wasn't just that he had helped her. It was that, for a brief moment, she had seen the kind of person the system usually turned into a file and a case number. The next morning, the alarm went off before dawn. The city was still half asleep when Matthias opened his eyes. The feeling in his chest wasn't exactly fear. It was something heavier, like a stone that had been there for months and refused to move. Every time he allowed himself to imagine the worst, he saw the same scene. His son asking where he was, and someone sidestepping the truth. Davi was still asleep, his hair a mess, his mouth slightly open. Matthias sat on the edge of the bed and watched him, memorizing him. The rise and fall of his chest, the curve of his fingers around the scrunched-up blanket, the way one sock had twisted halfway off his foot. There was a part of him that wanted to stay right there, to freeze that moment and refuse to move forward in time. "Dad," the boy mumbled, slowly waking. "Is it today?" "Yeah, buddy," Matthias answered softly. "It's today?" "The hearing." Davi dragged himself up to sit, rubbing at his eyes. "Are you coming back?" he asked, and the question cut through Matthias like a blade. He swallowed, feeling the dryness in his throat, the ache behind his ribs. "I am," he said. "I'll be back. Today is just talking to the judge. The lawyer will be there with me. I didn't do what they're saying, remember?" The boy nodded, but unease lingered in his gaze. "My teacher said if you tell the truth, you don't have to be afraid," Davi said. "But you look scared even when you're telling the truth." Matthias let out a long breath, the kind that carries more than air. "Sometimes we're scared," he replied quietly. "Not because we're lying, but because we know not everyone hears the truth the same way. Some people believe fast. Some only believe after you've been broken. But we hold on. Remember Grandma's phrase?" Davi's lips curled into a small, sleepy smile. "Even with nothing, I still have faith," he recited. "That's the one," Matthias said, his eyes bright. "We're taking that with us today." He dressed in the best clothes he had, which didn't magically become fancy just because they were the best. A clean shirt, though the fabric was thinning at the collar. Dark pants with neatly ironed seams. Shoes polished as well as worn shoes can be polished. He combed his short hair, shaved as close as he could, and studied his reflection. A tired man. A man who knew that people with his face and his address had a harder time convincing the world they were innocent. A man who wanted to come home tonight and be able to look his son in the eye and say, "We survived this one." He left Davi with their neighbor, Mrs. Selina, who seemed to have been born with her hands already raised in prayer. "You go with your head up, my boy," she told him, resting her weathered hand on his shoulder. "I've been praying all night. God doesn't sleep. Hope the judge doesn't, either," he tried to joke. "Not on top of my file, anyway." The bus ride to the courthouse felt longer than usual. Traffic crawled. Horns honked. People argued, and music leaked from someone's earbuds nearby. The world looked strangely normal for a day when his life might change completely. When he got off near the courthouse, the building loomed ahead, stone and glass, severe and indifferent, as if it had seen too many people come and go to care about one more. Inside, he emptied his pockets at security, walked through the metal detector, and picked up his things on the other side. People flowed around him, Lawyers with stacks of folders, defendants with their nervous families, clerks carrying files that looked heavier than they were. Everyone had somewhere to be. Everyone had a role. He spotted the public defender waiting in the hallway, flipping through a thick case file. The man smiled when he saw Mateus and extended his hand. "Mateus," he greeted. "You made it." "Would have taken more than a storm to keep me away," Mateus replied, shaking his hand with a grip that tried to hide how cold his fingers were. "How are you feeling?" the defender asked, already knowing the answer. "Nervous," Mateus admitted. "But standing. That's enough for now," the lawyer said, with a quick smile. "Listen, I went through your file again. The prosecution is leaning hard on the alleged victim's statement and the medical report. That story about the missing briefcase is still full of holes. I requested additional evidence, but a lot was unavailable or lost. Still, there are weaknesses we can use." "Like what?" Mateus asked. "The timing, for one," the defender replied. "His version of when and where this happened doesn't sync well with the public transport records and what your witnesses say. The warehouse security cameras conveniently stopped working exactly when the alleged assault occurred. What a coincidence. No one tried to pull footage from neighboring businesses back then. I have a request in now, but we'll see if anything's left. And one more thing, the warehouse manager? Old friend of the complainant. That's not illegal, but it's certainly interesting." Mateus' jaw tightened. "Too many coincidences," he muttered. "Exactly," the defender agreed. "We have your story, their story, and a lot of murky space in between. The judge assigned to your case," he lowered his voice slightly. "She has a reputation for pushing when things don't add up. That might work in our favor." Mateus nodded, not sure if the words comforted him or made his heart beat faster. The lawyer flipped the file closed, and the name printed on the front caught Mateus' eye. Presiding Judge, Honorable Isabella Mora Vasquez. Isabella. His stomach dropped. The letters blurred for a second. The alleyway of his memory lit up with last night's rain, hazard lights, jumper cables, and a grateful woman holding a wallet she never used. It had to be a coincidence. It was a common name. There were surely dozens of women called Isabella in the city, maybe several judges with that first name. His mind rushed to find reasons not to believe it. Because if it was the same woman, if life really was weaving things that tightly together, he didn't know what to do with that information. "Hey," the defender said, misreading his silence. "Don't let the name intimidate you. She's tough, but she's fair. I've been in her courtroom before. She doesn't like lazy work. That's good for us. We're not the ones twisting facts here." When they finally called his case, it felt like walking into a room where time moved differently. The door closed with a soft click that sounded much louder in his imagination. He stepped inside, and the courtroom's layout came into focus. The judge's elevated bench, the state seal on the wall, the long tables facing her, the worn wooden pews in the back where strangers sat and lives were quietly weighed. The prosecutor was already in her seat, arranging documents, face composed in a professional calm that had nothing personal against him, and yet everything about her posture said, "I'm here to prove you did it." At the other table sat the complainant, the businessman whose accusation had turned Mateus' life upside down. His suit was crisp, his watch discreetly expensive, his expression one of mild annoyance, as if it was an inconvenience for him to be here at all. Mateus' eyes lifted to the bench, and the world stopped. It was her. Her hair was neatly pulled back, her robe immaculate, her expression controlled. No rain, no headlights, no broken-down car. The woman whose battery he had revived the night before now wore the symbol of the system that might crush him or free him. The same pair of eyes that had reflected fear and gratitude by the roadside were now framed by authority and expectation. Isabella felt it too. The moment he walked in, something inside her jolted. She recognized the line of his jaw, the tired tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes scanned the room before he dared meet hers. Memories flashed in her mind. His hands on the jumper cables, the boy asleep in the back seat. The line, "I didn't stop for money," said without drama, just truth. She did not let any of that reach her face. On that bench, she wasn't the woman stranded in the rain or the daughter of a man once wrongfully accused. She was the judge, the person sworn to look at evidence, to compare testimonies, to weigh doubt and certainty, and to speak the law even when it hurt. Her personal feelings had no place on the record. "We are here today for the evidentiary hearing and trial in case number," she began, her voice steady and neutral, going through the formalities. Mateus listened as if she were reading someone else's story. The charges sounded heavier out loud: assault, robbery, harm caused. The prosecutor's opening remarks painted him as a violent man who had attacked an upright businessman outside a warehouse, stolen a briefcase full of critical documents, and fled into the night. The complainant's attorney had prepared every sentence carefully, making sure Mateus looked as guilty as possible without sounding too theatrical. No one mentioned that Mateus had never had a prior conviction. No one mentioned his kid. No one mentioned that the alleged critical documents were not described, not listed, not identified with any precision. The complainant testified first. He rose, adjusted his tie, and walked to the stand like a man used to talking in front of people and having them listen. He described the night of the incident in polished phrases: the unprovoked attack, the cowardly blow from behind, the professionally threatening nature of the missing file. He insisted he had seen Mateus well enough to recognize him later. He talked about fear, about feeling hunted, about the shadow that had fallen over his life since the attack. Mateus listened with a growing sense of estrangement. This story had his face in it, but none of his reality. Details shifted in his mind. He remembered reading the original police report. The complainant had said the briefcase was black. Now, under oath, he called it brown. Initially, he had claimed he'd been pushed from behind. Today, he said he had seen his attacker's face clearly before being shoved. Isabella took notes, each inconsistency quietly underlined in her mind. She had watched hundreds of people testify. Some lied with tears. Some lied with charm. Some, like this man, lied with the smooth confidence of someone certain the system would lean in their favor because it always had. Mateus' turn finally came. His palms were damp as he stood, as if the wood under his fingers might slip away. He walked to the stand, took the oath, and cleared his throat. "Your Honor," he began, his voice catching a little, "I know you must hear people say I'm innocent every single day. To you, this might be one more file, one more case. But for me, this isn't just a process. It's everything. It's my job, my house, my kid." He paused, forcing himself to look up. Her gaze met his, steady but not cruel. He saw no trace of last night there, no hint that she recognized him. And yet, something in him could not shake the feeling that she did. "The night they're talking about," he continued, "I was at the auto shop where I work. I stayed late. I often do. Extra hours mean extra pay, and extra pay means my son eats a little better and we fall a little less behind. The shop owner can confirm I was there. When I finally clocked out, I went straight to my neighbor's house to pick up my boy. He stays with her when I work late. We caught the last bus home. We were tired. All I wanted was to shower, eat something simple, and put him to bed. I didn't go to any warehouse. I never saw this man before the day I was arrested. I don't know what was in that briefcase. I don't even know if there was a briefcase at all." The public defender gently guided him through the timeline, helping him lay out times, routes, people who had seen him. He mentioned Miss Selena, the neighbor who babysat Davi. He mentioned coworkers. He mentioned the bus route they always took, the stop they always ran to reach. The prosecutor sought to poke holes. She tried to paint the witnesses as biased, as emotionally invested, as unreliable. It was the classic strategy: friends and neighbors lie, businessmen don't. Isabella listened, not just to the words, but to how they were spoken. She saw the way Mateus' shoulders hunched when he mentioned his son, the way his jaw clenched when he talked about the arrest, how his eyes flicked toward the prosecutor as if bracing for another blow. She had seen men lie smoothly. This wasn't that. If he was lying, he was terrible at it. She also noticed something else. Despite the tension, despite everything at stake, he never tried to charm her, never pleaded directly for her sympathy. He told his story as best he could, with the vocabulary of someone who didn't live in courtrooms or meeting rooms, but in garages and bus stops. More witnesses were called. The warehouse employee gave a statement, trying his best to sound neutral. He confirmed that, on the night in question, the warehouse security cameras had malfunctioned. He used technical excuses, mentioned a hardware failure, scribbled notes. Under gentle but persistent questioning, he tripped over his own dates, changed his explanation twice, and admitted that the maintenance logs were not very precise. Isabella's pen moved rapidly. The public defender highlighted the connection between the warehouse manager and the complainant, old friends, involved in prior business deals together. By the time Miss Selina took the stand, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. A woman with a floral dress, worn shoes, and a voice too loud for the delicate silence of that room sat down and caught everyone's attention in a way no lawyer ever could. "I'm not going to lie to you, ma'am," she said, using ma'am for the judge out of habit. "I watched that boy's kid often. I was there that night. He came knocking at my door late, with the boy half asleep, apologizing for being late as usual. I checked the clock like I always do. Habit, you know? It was around the time the bus usually passes. He didn't come in with blood on his clothes. He didn't come out of breath like he'd been running. He came like a man who just finished a long day of honest work. He's no angel, no one is. But a robber? No." The prosecutor objected to opinions on character, but the comment had already left a mark. No transcript, however meticulous, can truly capture the weight of an old woman's conviction when she swears someone is decent. Through it all, Isabella kept a straight face, though inside, something stirred that went beyond professional interest. She remembered her own father. She remembered nights sitting in the back of a courtroom as a teenager, watching a different judge, a different prosecutor, a different man in the dock. Her father, trying to explain that he hadn't taken the money they said he took. She remembered her mother whispering, "The truth will come. It always comes." She also remembered how long it took, and how much damage was done before it did. She had chosen her career in those long years of waiting. She had promised herself that, if she ever held a gavel, she would not let convenience decide guilt. She would not accept lazy investigations as enough. But being human meant she also carried scars. To protect herself and others from those scars, she had learned to keep her face unchanged, her questions precise, her tone controlled. At the end of that first hearing, there was no sentence. The prosecutor asked for more time to bring in additional documents. The defender argued against locking Mateus up while they sorted it out, citing his clean record, his role as a single parent, his ties to the community. Isabella weighed it all. She could have ordered his pretrial detention. The law gave her room to justify it. The prosecutor's expression suggested that she expected exactly that. Or she could let him walk out the front door that day, acknowledge the weakness of the case, and risk the backlash if someone decided to turn this into a headline. Considering the evidence so far, the nature of the charges, the lack of prior convictions, and the fact that the defendant is the primary caregiver of a minor child, she said finally, every word measured, "I will not impose pretrial detention at this time. Instead, I impose the following conditions: monthly check-ins with the court, prohibition from leaving the jurisdiction without prior authorization, and an obligation to keep his address current on record. Additionally, I order that new inquiries be made, obtain security footage from nearby businesses for the date and approximate time of the alleged events, and summon again the individual responsible for the warehouse's surveillance system for a supplemental testimony." Mateus felt his knees weaken, not from bad news but from the sudden release of the fear that he might leave that room in handcuffs. It wasn't victory. It was a reprieve, a chance to fight for the life he still wanted to live. As he left the room, the complainant brushed past him, leaning close enough that only Mateus heard the words. "You might have bought yourself some time today," the man murmured. "But people like you always lose in the end." Mateus clenched his jaw so hard his teeth hurt. Anger shot up, hot and wild. He imagined grabbing the man by the collar, shouting into his face, throwing all the swallowed rage of the last months at him. But through that red haze, he saw his son's face. He saw Davi waiting for him at the neighbor's house, asking, "Did you come back?" He saw how easily one outburst in a courthouse corridor could become a paragraph in a report that damaged everything. He swallowed the words. Silence, in that moment, was more powerful than any insult. Silence said, "You don't own my reaction. You don't decide who I become." Days slowly turned into weeks. Mateus went back to the shop, though something had changed there too. The owner called him aside. "Look, kid," the man said, wiping his hands on a rag. "You know I've always liked your work. You show up, you don't slack off. That counts for me. But this situation, clients talk. If they hear one of my guys is on trial for assault and robbery, they get nervous. I can't afford to scare them off. So, for now, you work more in the back. Less face-to-face with customers. If this clears up, we'll see." Mateus nodded, feeling the sting behind the practical words. I get it, he said. Thanks for not firing me. The nights didn't get easier. Davi started waking up more often, padding barefoot down the hallway to check that his father was still lying on the old sofa, eyes open in the dark. I asked God to be the judge too, the boy told him one night, crawling up beside him, to sit next to the lady in the black robe and tell her the truth in her ear. And what do you think he said? Mateus asked, pulling him close. That he hears us, Davi said after a beat. But that we have to be brave. Across the city, in an apartment that looked nothing like Mateus but wasn't as warm as people might imagine from the outside, Isabella sat at her dining table with files spread around her. She reread statements, cross-checked times, scribbled questions in the margins. It wasn't new for her to take work home. Justice rarely fit in office hours. But this case clung to her in a different way. It wasn't because he had helped her on the road. She wouldn't allow that to be the anchor. What wouldn't leave her alone was the overall shape of things, the malfunctioning cameras, the convenient gaps, the friend-of-a-friend manager, the perfectly composed businessman who expected the machinery of the system to move when he pressed a button. Her intern, Lucas, showed up one afternoon with a spark in his eyes and his laptop under his arm. Judge, I think I found something, he said, as soon as he got into her office. She gestured for him to come in. What is it? I went around the area again like you asked, he explained, placing the laptop on her desk and waking it up. Most places don't keep footage that long, especially not locally. But there's a pharmacy on the corner near the bus stop that uses cloud storage. They had to dig, but they recovered something from that night. He clicked a few times and brought up a grainy, but clear enough video. The timestamp in the corner matched the date of the alleged assault. The camera angle showed the sidewalk in front of the pharmacy and a stretch of the bus stop. Here, Lucas said, pointing. Watch. They saw a bus pulling up. A man and a child ran toward it, the man holding the boy's hand so he wouldn't slip. The boy stumbled for a second, and the man bent down to steady him. They climbed on. The bus doors closed. The time read 21:47. Isabella leaned closer, her heart tapping faster against her ribs. Even in low resolution, she recognized the line of his shoulders, the way he tilted his head toward the child, the small protective gesture of placing his hand on the boy's back as they stepped up. She checked the time again, cross-referencing it with the supposed time of the assault across town. It didn't add up. It couldn't add up. Make as many backups of this as humanly possible, she said, her voice lower than usual. Print stills. Get written confirmation from the pharmacy. Chain of custody, everything. This cannot disappear. At the same time, new information trickled in from another jurisdiction. The complainant was under investigation elsewhere for financial irregularities. The missing documents in this case began to look less like evidence of someone else's crime and more like potential proof of his own. Anger flared in Isabella, not the kind that makes you lose control, but the kind that makes you more precise. She had seen this story before, told in different accents, different suits. People with power bending reality around themselves, using institutions as shields while throwing people like Mateus into the fire as distractions. A second hearing was scheduled, this time to address the new evidence. When Mateus received the notice, his hands shook a little. The defender's voice on the phone carried more cautious optimism than before. There's something good coming, the lawyer said. I can't promise the outcome, but we're not where we started. On the morning of the hearing, Mateus kissed Davi's forehead before leaving him once again in Ms. Selena's care. The boy held on to a small toy car like it was a lucky charm. If you smile when you come out, I'll know it went well, Davi said. If you don't, I'll still be here. In the courtroom, the atmosphere felt heavier than last time. This wasn't just about hearing the same people repeat the same stories. It was about confronting those stories with something that could not be easily rewritten: images. The prosecution watched with tightened lips as the video from the pharmacy was played. The room saw Mateus and his son appear, running for the bus. They watched the bus pull away. They saw the timestamp. The defender laid out the distance between the bus stop and the warehouse, the travel time required to get from one point to the other. It simply didn't work with the timeline in the original complaint. The businessman's jaw clenched visibly. When questioned about the discrepancy, he stumbled over his explanation, first denying the video showed Mateus, then saying it was hard to tell. then claiming that perhaps his initial recollection of the time might have been imprecise. On top of that, the audios from the separate investigation were introduced, recordings where the businessman joked about finding someone to pin things on if certain documents were ever asked for. Names were muffled, references were veiled, but the tone was unmistakable. By the time the last piece of evidence was presented, the idea of Mateus as a violent thief had crumbled. In its place, another picture had emerged, that of a convenient target, someone from a background the system often finds easier to believe guilty than not, someone whose absence from his own life would barely ripple in the spaces the complainant inhabited. Isabella called a recess before issuing her verdict. In her chambers, she took off her robe and sat at her desk, staring at the blank space on the page where her decision would become words. She remembered again her father, his tired eyes, the way his shoulders had seemed permanently bent from carrying the weight of being mistrusted. She remembered the judge in that case, distant, efficient, never once looking up in a way that acknowledged the human cost of the delay in justice. She refused to be that, but she also refused to let herself go easy on anyone because of feelings. If she was going to free a man accused of a serious crime, it would be because the evidence, properly examined, demanded it. When she returned to the bench, her robe once more on her shoulders, the room settled into expectant silence. Mateus stood there, feeling as though his heart might burst out of his chest. The prosecutor sat quieter than before. The businessman stared at the table. The defender had his hands folded, eyes fixed on the judge. Having thoroughly reviewed the evidence presented, Isabella began, her tone formal yet clear, including initial testimonies, supplemental statements, and new material obtained at the court's direction. This court finds that the prosecution has not met its burden of proof in this case. The video footage, which places the defendant with his minor child at a bus stop across town around the time the alleged assault supposedly took place, strongly undercuts the timeline offered by the complainant. Furthermore, inconsistencies in the complainant's narrative, combined with external information about his potential motives regarding the missing documents, cast serious doubt on the reliability of his accusations. Mateus' breath hitched. In our legal system, she continued, we do not convict people on the basis of suspicion, social status, or convenience. We do not fill gaps in weak cases with our prejudices about who seems more likely to be a criminal. We require proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And where substantial, reasonable doubt exists, the law is clear. The defendant must be acquitted. Accordingly, this court finds the defendant not guilty of the charges brought against him and orders his immediate release from all conditions imposed in this matter. The words "not guilty" rolled through the room like a quiet wave. Some people barely reacted. They had seen this before with other faces and other names. For Mateus, it was an earthquake. His knees nearly gave way. Air rushed in and out of his lungs like it had been trapped for months and was finally escaping. The defender squeezed his shoulder hard enough to leave a mark. "You're free," the lawyer whispered. "You did it." Or rather, the truth finally did. Across the room, the businessman stood abruptly, something between anger and disbelief on his face. He muttered about appealing, about unprofessional leniency, about bias. The prosecutor put a restraining hand on his arm, reminding him that any dissatisfaction had to be channeled through legal motions, not outbursts. Isabella did not rise to the bait. She simply noted his comments and adjourned the session. In the hallway, Mateus stepped out and leaned his back against the cool wall. For a long moment, he simply covered his face with his hands and cried. It wasn't pretty or restrained. It was the raw, shaking sob of someone who had been holding on by his fingernails and had just been told he could let go, for now. When he finally stepped outside, blinking at the daylight as if he had been underground for years, he saw Davi on the bench with Miss Selina, legs swinging, clutching his toy car. The moment the boy saw his father's silhouette, he jumped to his feet and ran. "Dad! Dad!" he shouted. "What happened? What did she say?" Mateus knelt, arms wide. When his son collided with him, it felt like his heart was being sutured back together. "She listened," he said, his voice still rough. "She believed the truth. I'm cleared, son. They can't call me a criminal for this anymore." Davi wrapped his arms around his neck and buried his face in his chest. "I told God to tell her," the boy murmured. "I knew he would." Miss Selina wiped tears from her cheeks with the edge of her scarf. "I told you, my boy. she said through sniffles. Justice may walk slow, but it doesn't walk backward. Sometimes it comes in ways we don't expect. Sometimes it even wears a robe. Back inside, Isabella sat alone in the empty courtroom for a minute longer than necessary, staring at the space Mateus had just vacated. She knew the case wasn't really over. There would be paperwork, perhaps an appeal, murmurs among colleagues. Some people would criticize her decision, say she'd been soft. Others would say nothing, because they had long ago stopped being surprised when a poor man was spared prison. She gathered her things, robe, notes, pen, and walked out, shifting mentally from judge to ordinary citizen. In the parking lot, with her hair down and her blazer back on, she looked more like the woman stranded in the rain than the stern figure behind the bench. As she approached her car, she saw someone waiting nearby, a man standing by the edge of the parking space, hands shoved deep in his pockets, eyes lowered until he heard her footsteps and looked up. It was Mateus. For a moment, they simply regarded each other, two people who had shared 2 nights and 1 day that neither would forget. "I know this isn't like last time," he said, attempting a small, nervous smile. "No blinking lights, no broken engine. But I couldn't leave without saying something." She stopped a short distance away, neither inviting nor rejecting his presence. "What did you want to say?" she asked. "Thank you," he answered. "Not for doing me a favor. I know you didn't acquit me because of the road last night. You didn't even know who I was then. But thank you for seeing more than just my file. For insisting on looking all the way, even when it would have been easier not to." Her throat tightened, though she kept her face composed. "I just did my job," she said. "A lot of people get paid to do their job and still don't," he replied gently. "So, thank you anyway." She let herself smile, a real smile that wasn't part of any courtroom vocabulary. "You helped me last night without asking who I was," she said. "Today, I acted knowing exactly who you were in this case. Maybe that's the strange balance life chose. But the verdict wasn't a favor, Mateus. It was justice. Clumsy, delayed, imperfect justice, but still justice." He nodded slowly. "I know," he said. "I also know my life doesn't magically fix itself because of today. The bills are still on the table. Some people will still look at me and remember the accusation before they remember the acquittal. Fear doesn't evaporate just because someone says, 'not guilty' once. But for the first time in a long while, I don't feel like the whole world is leaning against me." "It isn't," she answered quietly. "Not always. There are people pushing with you. Sometimes you just don't see them." He looked down for a second, gathering his courage. "If I had driven on last night," he said, "if I had pretended not to see you, I would have betrayed the person my mother tried to raise. I would have been someone I'm not." Stopping there had nothing to do with court. "I didn't know who you were. I didn't expect anything back. The world didn't become a movie ending that night. The numbers in his bank account didn't suddenly grow. The gossip in the neighborhood wouldn't vanish overnight. The shop wouldn't immediately trust him with customers again. But something vital had shifted. He could breathe. He could walk down the street without feeling like every eye was a jury. And somewhere in the city, a woman who once watched her own father be wrongly accused looked at the signed decision on her desk and let herself feel, for just a moment, that maybe she hadn't chosen this job in vain. Now, if you're still here, listening to this story, maybe some part of it brushed against your own life. Maybe you've been judged for something you didn't do. Maybe you've watched someone you love carry a label they didn't deserve. Or maybe you've just had one of those nights when the world felt like it had turned its back on you, until some stranger stopped and reminded you that goodness hasn't gone extinct. So let me ask you, do you believe everything is just random? Or do you think sometimes life arranges these almost impossible coincidences on purpose, like underlined sentences in the middle of our days? If this story stirred something in you, if it made you remember a time when justice came from where you least expected, share it with someone who needs to hear that the world isn't only cruel. And tell me in the comments if you've ever lived through a moment that made you think, there's no way this was just chance. I'll be there, reading story after story. And if, at any point while listening, your eyes filled or your chest felt a little lighter, consider subscribing to this channel. But only if this story truly reached you. Because here, every story is a reminder that even when we think we have nothing left, we can still hold on to one thing. Faith that, somewhere, somehow, the truth is looking for a way to be heard.